Rain hammered the cobblestones of a destroyed Berlin courtyard. Under a low gunmetal sky, a line of German women officers stood trembling before a wooden table draped in an American flag. Their uniforms, once immaculate gray wool, were torn, rain-soaked, heavy with mud. In front of each woman lay a small pile of metal, iron crosses, war merit crosses, badges once pinned proudly to chests that now rose and fell with fear. A U.S. sergeant in a dark raincoat read the orders in a voice that barely rose above the storm. Decorations issued under the authority of the National Socialist government are hereby confiscated. One by one, gloved hands reached out, sweeping the medals into a wooden box. Each clink of steel on wood sounded like a verdict. Frau Lieutenant Erika Schmidt, 26, eyes red from sleepless nights, held her Iron Cross Second Class in both hands before surrendering it. She had earned it on the Eastern Front, dragging wounded men from a burning field hospital outside Kharkov. Now the medal felt poisonous, a relic of sin. When she placed it down, it slipped from her shaking fingers and fell to the ground. A ripple of silence spread through the courtyard. The rain paused, as if the world itself held its breath. And then, somewhere beyond the ruins, a church bell rang, its chime fractured but alive. The smell of wet stone and diesel lingered for hours after the rain ended. By nightfall, the courtyard had emptied, leaving behind muddy footprints and the echo of boots. Erika Schmidt sat on a bench beneath a shattered archway, her damp hair clinging to her cheeks. In her lap, the absence of the metal felt heavier than the metal ever had. Around her, Berlin was not a city anymore, but a vast open wound, a horizon of craters and skeletal buildings, windows gaping like blind eyes. For days, the women had been ordered to report to the Allied Disarmament Office, their names copied from rosters recovered in the ruins of the Reich's personnel archives. The male officers had been dealt with earlier, many shipped to camps, others gone missing in the Soviet zone. But these women, nurses and clerks turned field officers, were a curiosity to their captors. They were interrogated, fingerprinted, and finally stripped of insignia. Some cried, others laughed bitterly. Erika neither cried nor laughed. She simply existed, suspended between guilt and exhaustion. In the dim corridor of the requisitioned ministry building, an American lieutenant named Charles Reed observed her through cigarette smoke. "You were with Army Group South?" he asked, flipping through a file. "Medical Corps," she replied quietly. "Field evacuation under General Hube." He nodded, not unkindly. "Says here you earned commendation for bravery." "It no longer matters," she said. He studied her face, drawn but unbroken. "It will someday," he murmured, and signed the release form. She was free to go, though the word freedom now felt foreign. Outside, the streets pulsed with hunger and barter. Women traded jewelry for bread. Men sold uniforms for cigarettes. Children scavenged in rubble, laughing with the eerie resilience of those too young to remember peace. Erika wandered aimlessly until she reached the Tiergarten, once a park of fountains and music. Now it was a forest of chimneys rising from underground shelters where families huddled around makeshift stoves. A violin played somewhere in the dark, one string missing, the melody hauntingly incomplete. She found shelter in a gutted apartment block near Potsdamer Platz. The building leaned like a drunk, its stairwell lit by candles jammed into empty bottles. Her roommate, a former telegraph operator named Margaret, had survived by typing requisitions for the Russians. "Better letters than graves," she joked bitterly. At night, they shared stories whispered like confessions of the front, of lost lovers, of shame that clung like smoke. "Do you ever miss it?" Margaret asked once. "The uniform?" Erika shook her head. "No, only the certainty." "And what was that?" "That we were serving something greater than ourselves." She paused. "Now I know how small that greatness was." Weeks turned to months. Allied patrols grew less suspicious, the markets fuller. Yet Berlin remained divided not by walls but by wounds. One afternoon, Erika volunteered at a Red Cross kitchen distributing soup to refugees. She ladled thin broth into tin cups, her hands steady despite the cold. An old man in rags stared at her insignialess coat. "Were you one of them?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. He looked at her for a long moment, then took the cup and whispered, "Then you understand hunger." It was not accusation, but absolution. That night, she returned to the apartment and retrieved from her trunk a small parcel wrapped in oilcloth, the only possession she had kept from the war, a photograph of her field unit near Kharkov. 12 faces, some smiling, most already dead. Behind them, the endless snow. On the back, written in her own hand, were the words, "Wir haben geglaubt, we believed." She stared at it until the candle burned out. In early 1946, rumors spread of trials in Nuremberg. Newspapers printed lists of names and sentences, hanging, life, 20 years. On the radio, translators' voices cracked as they rendered guilt into multiple languages. The city listened, half relieved, half defensive. Erica listened too, but more to the silences between words. She wondered if justice could truly measure belief. She began writing in a notebook, short entries, fragments of thought. They took my medal to erase what it represented. But what do I erase to forget why I earned it? The notebook became her confession. Each page peeled away layers of obedience until she could finally see herself. Not as a monster, not as a martyr, but as a human being who had followed orders because she feared chaos more than evil. One morning, a letter arrived at the soup kitchen addressed to her. The envelope bore an American postmark. Inside was a single sheet. "To Lieutenant Schmidt, I've been reassigned to Frankfurt. I remember your steadiness that day. Berlin needs people like you to rebuild it. If you ever seek work outside the ruins, come south. Lieutenant Charles Reed." She folded the letter slowly, uncertain what to feel. That night she told Margaret, who laughed. "The enemy writes love letters now?" "It's not love," Erica said softly. "It's faith, something rarer." By spring she boarded a train to Frankfurt. The journey south felt like traveling through the body of a dead nation slowly regenerating. In towns along the way she saw people planting gardens in bomb craters, children flying kites made from ration paper. When the train crossed the main river, sunlight broke through for the first time in weeks. She stepped onto the platform, the air scented with coal and blooming linden trees. Frankfurt was a different world, cleaner, more organized under American administration. She found work as an interpreter for the Allied Civil Affairs Division, translating interviews of displaced persons seeking repatriation. Her English was stiff but precise. The Americans treated her with professional distance, though some never looked her in the eye. She didn't mind. She had learned to live with the weight of unseen judgment. In the evenings, she walked along the riverbank where new bridges were being built. Once she saw Charles Reed across the street, speaking with engineers. He noticed her, lifted his cap in greeting, and walked over. "You came," he said, smiling. "You invited me," she replied. They talked until dusk about work, about the future. He confessed he was leaving soon, transferred back to the States. "What will you do then?" he asked. She looked at the half-finished bridge glowing in twilight. "Keep crossing," she said. The night before he departed, he gave her a small box, the same kind once used for medals. Inside was a silver locket shaped like a dove. "No insignia," he said. "Just wings." She closed it in her palm. "Then maybe I can wear it without shame." When he left, she felt an ache she could not name. But she also felt lighter, as if something had been returned to her. Not her medal, not her honor, but her capacity to believe in gentleness after brutality. The first thing Erica noticed about Frankfurt in 1946 was how clean the uniforms were. American officers walked through the streets like symbols of order resurrected from chaos. Pressed khaki, polished boots, insignia gleaming beneath a sky scrubbed clear by spring. The German uniforms, when they appeared, were ghosts, stripped of eagles and crosses, recycled into work coats or burned in furnaces behind the barracks. To the victors, clothing was decoration. To the defeated, it was confession. Erica Schmidt lived in a small attic room above a bakery run by an old widow named Frau König. Every morning, before the sun had fully risen, she woke to the smell of yeast and wood smoke rising through the floorboards. Down below, the ovens glowed red, and she could hear the widow whispering prayers to a husband lost in 1916 and a son lost in 1943. "God must be tired of counting," Frau König often said, handing Erica a piece of bread still warm from the oven. "So we count for him." Erica's days at the Allied Civil Affairs Office were a monotony of translation and record-keeping. She sat in a long hall filled with typewriters and the clicking rhythm of reconstruction. Displaced persons filed through. Polish laborers, French prisoners, Russian nurses, survivors who no longer believed in countries. Her task was to turn their pain into documents stamped approved for repatriation or denied for security reasons. She translated their testimonies with clinical precision, though each story carved quietly into her. A Polish girl describing her mother's last night in a camp. A Czech man who refused to go home because there is no home left. Between sentences, she felt their eyes on her, eyes that recognized in her face the same language as those who once wore gray. At lunch, she ate in silence, watching the American officers laugh over coffee. Sometimes she caught herself envying their ease, their ability to stand tall without flinching. Her own posture had become a habit of apology. When one of the clerks asked why she never smiled, she replied, "Because I am still learning which side I belong to." The room went quiet. Nobody asked again. That summer the temperature soared. The river main shimmered with the reflection of cranes and scaffolding, and the city began to hum again. Yet beneath the surface tensions remained. Former Nazis sought to disappear into civilian life. Collaborators changed their names. The Americans called it denazification, but for many it was only a word. Paper could not erase ideology. It could only file it away. One afternoon, Erica was summoned to the central office. A major named Lewis handed her a folder stamped confidential. "You speak good English," he said. "We need interpreters for the tribunal hearings next month. Medical personnel from your corps are among the witnesses." She froze. "My corps?" "Yes, Field Hospital Unit 517. You're not under suspicion, Miss Schmidt. We simply need someone who understands the terminology." She nodded slowly. "I understand more than that," she murmured. The tribunal was held in a requisitioned courthouse overlooking the river. Its marble columns were pockmarked with bullet holes, but inside, the walls gleamed with fresh paint, as if justice required aesthetic renewal. Erica sat beside the bench, translating testimony for American prosecutors and German witnesses alike. The language of guilt was heavy. It dragged through the air like smoke. The first defendant, a surgeon, insisted he had only followed protocol. The second, a nurse, wept uncontrollably, claiming she had been forced to assist in experiments at Ravensbrück. Erica's pen trembled as she repeated the words into English. "I held their hands when they screamed. I told them it was for the Reich." On the third day, she recognized a familiar face among the witnesses, a woman from her old field unit, Lieutenant Brunner. The same woman who had once pinned Erica's medal to her tunic outside Kharkov. Now Brunner's uniform was gone, replaced by a plain gray dress. She glanced at Erica but showed no recognition. When asked about the confiscation of medals, she spoke in a voice emptied of emotion. "We believed the medals would outlive the men. We were wrong." Erica translated each word, her throat tightening. Later, during recess, she approached her in the corridor. "Helga," she said softly. Brunner turned, eyes wary. "You. I thought you were dead? Most of us are." Silence hung between them. "Why did you take it off?" Helga asked suddenly. "The medal." Erica looked at the floor. "Because it no longer meant courage. It meant obedience." Helga's jaw clenched. "And what are you now?" "Trying to be disobedient," Erica said. They never spoke again. By the time the hearings ended, Erica felt hollowed out. Justice had been served, yes, but it tasted metallic. At night, she walked the streets alone, past bars where jazz spilled into the night. American soldiers danced with German women, laughter echoing in a language that had once been foreign to Joy. In a shop window, she caught her reflection, tired yet strangely unbroken. She thought of the day her medals were taken, the sound of rain on wood. That sound had been an ending, but perhaps also a beginning. Autumn arrived with cold rain. The bakery's oven struggled to keep up, and Frau Koenig's health began to fail. Erica cared for her between shifts, bringing home milk and coal when she could. One evening, as they sat together by candlelight, the old woman said, "You know, child, metals rust, but decency doesn't. That's what I tell the priest when he scolds me for baking without ration stamps." She smiled faintly. "You remind me of my son." Erica looked up. "He fought on the Eastern Front?" "Yes," Frau Koenig said. "He wrote me once, 'Mother, I am learning how to be brave in the wrong cause.' He never wrote again." The candle flickered between them, its flame wavering like a memory refusing to die. The next morning, Frau Koenig passed away in her sleep. Erica arranged for a simple burial. No priest, no speeches, just a loaf of bread placed atop the coffin. The bakery closed, its ovens cold. Alone in the attic, Erica felt the city's silence press against her ribs. She wrote a letter to the Red Cross offering to volunteer as a field nurse again. This time for humanitarian relief. Perhaps if I mend enough wounds, she wrote. I will forget the ones I helped cause. Weeks later, a reply arrived. Approved. Report to Munich. Munich was brighter, freer. The war felt more distant here, as if the city had chosen to forget faster. Allied banners hung beside church steeples. Jazz bands played in bombed-out beer halls. Erica worked in a temporary hospital treating displaced children, orphans from Poland, Yugoslavia, Ukraine. Their eyes were ancient. They feared silence more than pain. She learned to comfort without speaking, to rebuild trust with gestures instead of flags. Among the staff was a young American doctor named Paul Whitman. He was courteous, sharp-minded, and carried himself with quiet weariness. You're different from the others, he said one afternoon as they tended to a boy with frostbitten hands. The others still look at us as conquerors. And how do you see us? She asked. He thought for a moment. As people who survived themselves. She looked at him then, really looked. The fatigue under his eyes, the calluses on his hands. Then we are the same, she said. Days blurred into weeks. They worked side by side in rhythm, she dressing wounds, he recording charts. One night after curfew, they shared a cigarette by the window. The city was quiet, the sky washed pale by moonlight. Do you ever miss it? He asked suddenly. The uniform? No, she said. But sometimes I miss believing in purpose. He exhaled smoke slowly. Purpose is a dangerous addiction, she smiled faintly. So is redemption. Over time, their friendship deepened into something unspoken. He lent her books, Hemingway, Tolstoy, Remarque. She taught him fragments of German poetry. Yet the past never entirely released its grip. When he touched the scar on her wrist, an old burn from Kharkov, she flinched. What happened? He asked. I reached for someone who didn't survive, she whispered. He nodded, saying nothing. In that silence, they both understood. In early 1948, as the Cold War's shadow lengthened, the hospital was reorganized under new directives. Many American staff were recalled home. On his final day, Paul found Erica in the ward folding sheets. They're sending me to Washington, he said. They want me to teach about medical ethics after war. She laughed softly. Teach them that mercy is contagious. He hesitated, then handed her a small envelope. Inside was a ticket, 3rd class, passage to New York. If you ever want to start again, he said, there's room for you. She looked at him with something like gratitude and sorrow combined. I already started again, she said. Here. He nodded, kissed her hand, and left without turning back. That night she walked alone to the river. The wind carried the smell of smoke and lilacs. She took the envelope from her pocket, opened it, and tore the ticket in half. The pieces fluttered into the current, vanishing downstream. No more uniforms, she whispered. No more borders. The water glittered briefly, then swallowed the paper whole. When the Berlin airlift began months later, Erica volunteered once again, coordinating medical relief for the starving city she had once fled. The cargo planes roared overhead day and night, silver birds dropping food instead of bombs. For the first time, Germany's sky rained mercy. She stood on the tarmac watching crates descend on parachutes, her eyes bright with disbelief. A British pilot passing by saluted playfully. We meet again, Fräulein, he said. She smiled. Perhaps this time as equals. In Berlin, she saw the faces of children who had never seen an orange, the faces of women who still wore ghosts on their shoulders. She worked until her hands blistered, distributing penicillin, powdered milk, hope. Sometimes she wondered if any of this could truly balance the ledger of history. But she kept working anyway. We rebuild not for forgiveness, she told her volunteers, but so there will be something left worth forgiving. One evening, as the airlift planes droned above, she returned to her quarters, a converted classroom with walls scrawled by chalk maps. On her cot lay a parcel with an American postmark. Inside was a book of poetry and a note, still teaching mercy, still believing it matters. P.W. She smiled and tucked the letter into her locket. The dove-shaped silver now carried both memory and promise. By 1950, the uniform that had once defined her was a distant ghost. She wore the plain dress of a relief worker, its pockets filled with gauze, pencils, and small sweets for the children. Yet in moments of exhaustion, when she heard the echo of boots in a hallway or the metallic clink of metals at ceremonies, her chest tightened. She would remember that rainy Berlin courtyard, the table, the box, the sound of surrender. And she would whisper to herself, "They took the medals, not the meaning." Winter returned to Berlin like a ghost refusing to leave the house it once owned. The air was brittle, the sky pale and soundless. Smoke curled from chimneys that had survived 2 wars, gray fingers rising from the ribs of a city still learning to breathe again. Erika Schmidt stood at the edge of Tempelhof Airfield, her coat flapping in the wind, watching another plane lift off toward the west. Each flight was a promise that Germany would not starve. Each departure left behind the silence of those who stayed. By now she had become a senior nurse within the Allied Relief Organization, her German discipline and her fluency in English making her invaluable. She trained younger women who had grown up amid rubble and fear, teaching them to set fractures, ration penicillin, and, when necessary, speak gently to those who no longer trusted kindness. The camp's children called her Frau Engel, the angel lady, because she never raised her voice and always found a way to make them laugh, even when the soup was thin and the blankets were cold. Yet beneath that calm, Erika carried a weight that refused to fade. In her drawer, wrapped in cloth, lay a faded photograph of her old field unit, those 12 faces frozen forever in snow. Each year she had tried to throw it away. Each year she failed. The photograph had become her penance. It reminded her of the moment when she had believed obedience was virtue, when medals meant honor and silence meant survival. At night, the airlift planes thundered overhead, their engines shaking the windows. She would lie awake listening, counting each passing aircraft like a rosary of redemption. "One for the children," she whispered. "One for those who will never learn peace." The noise was comforting, like the heartbeat of something larger than guilt. One morning, as frost glittered on the airfield fences, a messenger brought her a telegram. It was from Munich. "Repatriation office requests your presence as translator for displaced POW nurses. Report immediately." She folded the telegram carefully. Munich, where the war's ghost still wandered the corridors of bureaucracy. She boarded the train that same night, her reflection in the dark window framed by the flicker of passing lights. For the first time in years, she wore the small silver dove around her neck, the locket that Paul Whitman had given her. It felt both fragile and defiant. When she arrived, the repatriation office was crowded with women, former auxiliaries, nurses, typists, widows, all seeking permission to return home or start new lives abroad. The hall smelled of damp wool and fear. A British officer briefed her. "We're interviewing a group of female prisoners recently released from the Soviet zone. They were held for 4 years. Some are ill, others broken. We need someone who understands both the language and the silence." She nodded. "I understand both." The interviews began in a dim room lit by a single lamp. The women entered one by one, thin, pale, eyes hollow from hunger and memory. Many could barely speak. Erika translated their fragmented words, her own voice steady though her hands trembled. One woman described forced labor in coal mines, another the long march east, another the births of children never seen again. There was no anger in their tone, only exhaustion. The world had turned, and they had been left behind. On the 3rd day, a name on the list froze Erika where she stood. Brunner. Helga, former Field Hospital Unit 517. She felt the air leave her lungs. When the door opened, Helga stepped inside, gaunt but unmistakable. Her once blonde hair was streaked with gray, her uniform now a ragged civilian coat. They stared at each other across the table, 4 years of unspoken history between them. "Name?" the officer asked. "Helga Brunner. Occupation during war?" "Nurse lieutenant." "Under whose command?" She hesitated. "Field Hospital 517, Commander Hube's division." The officer turned to Erika. "Translate." But Erika could not move. The past had returned, wearing her own reflection. Helga's eyes flickered. "You're alive," she whispered in German. "I thought they took you east." "They took everything else," Erika replied softly. After the interview, when the officer left the room, Helga remained seated. The silence between them was heavier than any sentence. Finally, she said, "They told us you worked for the Allies now." "I work for Mercy," Erika said. "If that's what they are." Helga looked down at her hands, the skin cracked and pale. "We did what we had to do. Don't forget that." "I haven't," Erika said. "That's why I'm still here." Helga exhaled slowly. They humiliated us, you know. Made us strip our medals, our badges, everything, as if metal could hold guilt. Erica's voice was quiet. It held pride, and pride built the graves. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Helga reached into her pocket and placed something on the table. A small, rusted iron cross, the ribbon torn. I kept it, she said. Not for the Reich, for remembrance. I can't bury it, and I can't wear it. Maybe you can decide what it's worth. Erica stared at the medal, the same symbol she had surrendered years ago, now corroded and pitiful. Slowly, she closed her hand around it. It's worth exactly what we learned from it, she said. Nothing more. Helga nodded faintly. Then maybe that's enough. When the interviews ended that week, Erica stayed behind. She placed the rusted medal into an envelope and mailed it to Geneva, addressed to the International Red Cross Archive. Inside, she enclosed a note. Artifact from a war where belief became blindness. Preserve it not as honor, but as warning. Returning to Berlin, she found the city changed again. New walls were rising, not of brick, but of ideology. East and West carved the streets into invisible frontiers. Soldiers wore different uniforms now, but the same suspicion in their eyes. She felt history repeating itself with new banners. The lesson, it seemed, had not yet been learned. In 1952, she accepted a post with the German Red Cross's Civilian Relief Branch. Her work took her through villages still pocked with craters, into hospitals rebuilt from barns, and across the new border zones where families waited for missing names. Everywhere she went, she encountered women like herself, those who had once believed in orders and now believed only in endurance. Together they built orphanages, soup kitchens, schools. It was humble, unglamorous labor, but it was also the quiet revolution of compassion. One evening, in a camp near Dresden, she met a young reporter from the newly formed Süddeutsche Zeitung. He was gathering stories for an article on the forgotten women of the Reich. His name was Martin Adler. He was 28, with dark hair and a camera slung around his neck. You were an officer once, weren't you? He asked, flipping through his notes. She nodded. And now you serve the Red Cross. Why? Because the uniform taught me how to obey, she said. Now I'm learning how to listen. He smiled faintly. That's a good line. It's not a line, she replied. It's the truth. Over the following weeks, Martin shadowed her work, photographing her as she distributed supplies, interviewed refugees, and comforted the sick. His lens captured her not as a symbol but as a survivor in motion. One night, as they sat by a fire in the ruins of a train station, he asked, Do you ever think people will forgive us? She stared into the flames. Forgiveness isn't given, she said. It's earned, day by day, in how gently we live. He lowered his camera. Then you've earned more than most. His article, published that winter, was titled The Nurse Who Forgot Her Medals. It was read across the New Germany, translated by Allied correspondents, and quietly praised for its honesty. Some called her a traitor to the past. Others called her a bridge to the future. She ignored both. She only hoped the story would remind someone somewhere that morality could be rebuilt like a city, brick by brick, with patience and shame intertwined. By 1955, the Federal Republic of Germany was reborn. Soldiers wore new insignia. The West had claimed virtue through reconstruction. One day, the Red Cross received an invitation from Bonn. The Chancellor requests attendance of exemplary post-war nurses at a national honor ceremony. Erica hesitated, but her colleagues urged her to go. They're giving out medals again, one joked. She smiled thinly. Then maybe this time we'll know what they mean. The ceremony was held in a marble hall filled with diplomats and flashbulbs. A brass band played triumphantly as each nurse received a silver cross engraved with the new federal eagle. When Erica's name was called, she walked slowly to the podium. The Chancellor's representative handed her the medal and said, For exemplary humanitarian service and moral courage. She looked down at the shining medal in her palm, its edges gleaming untainted by ideology. Then she pinned it quietly inside her coat where it would not be seen. Not on the chest, she thought. On the heart. After the ceremony, reporters gathered asking for comments. One asked if it felt ironic to receive another medal after renouncing the last. She looked into the camera and said, It's not irony, it's evolution. The room went silent before the applause began. That night, back in her small apartment overlooking the Rhine, She opened a drawer and placed the new medal beside the old rusted one that had been returned from Geneva for display. 2 pieces of metal, 2 worlds. Between them lay everything she had become. She wrote in her journal, "They humiliated us to strip us of false honor. Perhaps humiliation was the first kindness. It forced us to rebuild dignity without uniform or anthem." Outside, the river murmured against its banks. The sound was softer than rain, like the echo of metals falling into water long ago. The years passed quietly. Martin Adler's photographs won recognition abroad. One image, Erika kneeling to tie a child's shoe amid the ruins, became emblematic of Germany's moral rebirth. She disliked the fame but accepted it as part of history's penance. When visitors asked what had kept her going, she always gave the same answer: "Because silence would have made me guilty twice." In 1959, she was invited to Geneva for a Red Cross symposium on post-war ethics. She walked through the museum archives where her letter and the rusted iron cross had been preserved behind glass. The placard read, "Donated by former German nurse Anonymous, symbol of repentance." She stood before it for a long time, unseen tears tracing lines across her face. A curator approached quietly. "It's powerful, isn't it?" "Yes," she said. "Because it's ugly." The curator smiled gently. "And yet you came back to see it." "I needed to remember why mercy must be earned every generation," Erika replied. Before leaving Geneva, she mailed a small parcel to Washington. Inside was her second medal, the Silver Cross of the New Republic, and a letter to Dr. Paul Whitman. "You once told me that purpose is a dangerous addiction. You were right. I have traded it for persistence. And persistence, perhaps, is the sober form of faith. Thank you for teaching mercy. It saved more than lives, it saved me." She never knew if he received it. But that night, as her train crossed back into Germany, she dreamed of Berlin again. Of rain, of medals falling, of a church bell echoing over ruins. This time, no one wept. The courtyard was empty, washed clean by time. The rain returned to the Rhine that spring as if time itself had circled back to remind the living that cleansing was never complete. By 1959, the war was fading into textbooks, yet the air still carried a taste of ash after each storm. Erika Schmidt, now 40, walked slowly along the embankment beneath an umbrella whose handle was chipped from years of use. Children laughed near the ferry dock where once there had been refugee queues. A man in a gray suit sold balloons under a sign that read, "Freedom Festival." The city had taught itself to smile again, but Erika knew that beneath every brick lay a memory no one wanted to touch. She was director now of a new clinic for war orphans and displaced mothers. Each morning she opened the doors to faces from every corner of Europe, Polish, Dutch, Hungarian, Russian, and each evening she locked them behind her with the ritual care of someone guarding a fragile miracle. She had grown used to their questions. Where is home?
Will my father come back?
Her answers were never lies, only gentle evasions. Home is where you're safe tonight. Your father loves you, wherever he is. The truth was too heavy for small shoulders. On a gray April morning, a visitor arrived from Bonn, a tall man in a dark overcoat, introducing himself as Heinrich Kruger, Ministry of Justice. He carried a briefcase stuffed with files. "We're establishing a commission," he explained, "to investigate the wartime medical corps. Many cases remain unresolved. We need someone with experience and a clean record." He paused. "You have both." Erika studied his face, sharp, earnest, perhaps genuinely believing that paper could exorcise ghosts. "I'll help," she said, "but only if we seek truth, not vengeance." He nodded. "Truth is all that's left to us." Weeks later, she sat in a small office filled with dusty files, her desk a landscape of names and numbers. The commission reviewed petitions from former medical staff, seeking rehabilitation or pension rights. Some letters were defiant, others pleading. One signature stopped her cold, Helga Brunner. Attached was a statement written in shaky ink. "I served without malice. I am tired of being a symbol. I ask to be seen as human again." Erika closed the folder, her heart tight. Mercy was easy in theory. It was hard when it wore a familiar face. That evening, she walked to the cathedral square where the stone steps still bore scars of shell fire. She lit a candle and placed it among hundreds of others. For a moment, the flames seemed like souls crowded together for warmth. She whispered, "If I forgive her, do I betray the dead?" The wind bent the flame but did not kill it. Perhaps that was answer enough. When Helga arrived for the hearing, the years had softened her into something almost unrecognizable. She walked with a cane, her coat patched, her eyes clear but guarded. They sat across from each other again, two survivors of different versions of the same war. Helga spoke quietly. I did terrible things by not refusing to do them. I followed orders because I was afraid to be alone. Erica listened without interrupting. When it was her turn, she said, I was afraid too. Afraid of losing purpose. Now I think purpose is what we should fear most when it asks for obedience. They sat in silence until the stenographer coughed. Erica signed the recommendation, rehabilitate. Not because Helga was innocent, but because she was brave enough to admit she wasn't. The press called the decision controversial. Old wounds bled in editorials. Letters accused the commission of betrayal. One morning a parcel arrived for Erica. No return address, only a plain wooden box. Inside lay a medal, the Iron Cross, its edges polished clean, its ribbon new. A note beneath it read, You cannot erase what we fought for. She threw it into the fire. The metal hissed, then split, leaving only smoke that smelled faintly of machine oil and ashes. After that, she avoided newspapers. Instead, she buried herself in work, organizing vaccination drives, opening maternity wards, reuniting families divided by the border. When the Berlin Wall rose in 1961, she was in Leipzig on a mission. Overnight, her return route was sealed. Trapped in the East, she found herself once again living under a system of banners and slogans. This time the posters were red instead of black, the faces different, the music the same. The authorities assigned her to a state hospital. She kept her head down, treating patients by day and writing letters she could never send by night. In her journal she wrote, They speak of progress, but their eyes are hungry for control. I have lived too long among ideologies to trust any that feed on fear. In the ward she met a young orderly named Annalisa, barely 20, whose father had been a Stasi officer. The girl confided, They say you were once one of them, the Nazis. Erica nodded. I was once one of many who forgot to think. Annalisa asked, Does it ever end? Erica smiled sadly. The thinking or the forgetting? The girl did not know how to answer. When the wall finally fell 28 years later, Erica was an old woman living in a small flat overlooking the hospital courtyard. She watched on television as crowds danced on the bricks that had once divided their souls. Tears rolled down her face, not for the past, but for the proof that it could still be undone. She wrote in her final journal, The walls we build around others are the walls we fear within ourselves. If they can fall in Berlin, perhaps they can fall in the heart. Shortly after reunification, a documentary crew from the BBC arrived to film survivors of the Reich's medical corps. They found her in the hospital garden, feeding sparrows with crumbs of bread. The producer, a young woman named Sarah Whitman, introduced herself. When Erica heard the name, she looked up with astonishment. Whitman? Yes, Sarah smiled. My grandfather was Paul Whitman. He served with the Allied Medical Corps after the war. Erica felt the world tilt slightly. I knew him, she whispered. He believed mercy was contagious. Sarah nodded. He used to say that too. He died 10 years ago. I think he'd be honored to know you kept it spreading. The interview was filmed in a quiet room with whitewashed walls. Cameras hummed softly. Sarah asked, Do you regret surrendering your medals? Erica smiled, her eyes bright. No, they were never mine to begin with. They belonged to a nation that confused discipline for virtue. When they took them away, I learned the difference. Would you accept one now? Sarah asked. Erica shook her head. I already have one, she said, touching her chest lightly. It beats every day. The crew was silent. Outside, sparrows fluttered against the window pane, their tiny wings tracing patterns like forgiveness in motion. When the documentary aired a year later, viewers across Europe wrote letters to the station. Some called her a saint, others a hypocrite. Erica did not read them. She was busy teaching young nurses how to listen to silence, how to treat not just wounds, but shame. Her lectures were simple, delivered in a voice softened by age yet sharp with memory. History is not a mirror, she told them. It is a window. Look through it, not into it. One evening after class, she found Sarah waiting by the gate holding a small parcel. My mother asked me to give you this, Sarah said. Inside was the silver locket Erica had sent to Paul decades earlier, its surface gently worn. He kept it on his desk until the day he died, Sarah said. He wrote your name inside. Erica opened it. On one side, the tiny engraving of a dove. On the other, the words, continue. Her hands shook. I think I finally will, she whispered. In her last years, she moved to a small house by the river, the same river that had once carried her youth and her tears away. She spent her days painting landscapes of fields and children, always leaving the skies unfinished. When friends asked why, she replied, so there's room for those still rising. Her health faltered, but her mind remained bright. On the evening of her 75th birthday, she walked to the attic and opened an old trunk filled with journals, letters, and a single photograph of 12 women in snow. She placed it on the windowsill and watched the light fade behind it. The faces seemed to soften in the glow, forgiven by time. Before bed, she wrote her final entry. They took our medals to humiliate us. But in that humiliation, we found something the war had never taught us: humility. If one day a child asks what the war gave me, I will answer. It taught me how to begin again without believing I deserved to. She died that night in her sleep, the locket still warm in her hand. At her funeral, the church was filled with nurses, orphans, and students who had once called her Frau Engel. Sarah Whitman delivered the eulogy. She believed, she said, that the greatest courage is to love after obedience has failed. When the coffin was lowered, the choir sang softly, not military hymns, but a folk song about rain and return. Years later, in a museum in Geneva, two objects would be displayed side by side: a rusted iron cross and a silver locket shaped like a dove. The plaque beneath read, "From War to Mercy, the journey of a woman who learned that redemption weighs less than pride." Visitors often lingered there longer than at any other exhibit. Some left in silence, others wiped their eyes, and somewhere beyond the reach of history's noise, the echo of rain on wood still sounded, the moment medals fell and humanity was born again. The museum smelled faintly of dust and history, like old paper warmed by afternoon sun. It was 1995, 50 years since the end of the war, and Germany was preparing for another anniversary of remembrance. School groups moved through the halls, their sneakers squeaking softly on marble floors, their whispers fluttering like wings in the silence between exhibits. In the far wing of the National Memorial of Humanity, a new display had just opened: Mercy After War. Behind the glass, two objects rested side by side: a rusted iron cross and a small silver locket shaped like a dove. The plaque read, "Donated by the Schmidt Foundation for Humanitarian Ethics. Artifacts of transformation. Symbols once used to divide, now united in remembrance." Beside the exhibit stood an elderly man in a wool coat, his hair white, his posture still soldier straight. His name was Lucas Adler, grandson of the journalist Martin Adler and godson to a woman history had almost forgotten, Erica Schmidt. He had come to speak at the exhibition's opening, carrying in his hands a folded piece of paper, her final letter, written decades earlier in her delicate handwriting. When he stepped up to the podium, the crowd fell quiet. Cameras clicked softly. Light glinted off the glass case behind him. "My godmother once told me," he began, "that the most dangerous medal is the one worn on the inside, the kind that makes you believe you are right when you are merely obedient. She learned that truth the hardest way a person can, by surviving her own convictions." He unfolded the paper carefully. These are her words, written the year before she died. I've never read them aloud until today. The room seemed to lean closer as he began. "If they ever ask what became of the women whose medals were taken, tell them we did not disappear. We worked, we fed, we rebuilt. They took the medal, yes, but not the memory of what it meant to serve. Not the false version of service, but the kind that asks for nothing in return. We became invisible on purpose so that goodness could be visible again." His voice trembled, and for a moment he had to stop. Through the glass behind him, the reflection of the iron cross glimmered faintly in the museum light. Its once cruel geometry softened by rust and time. The dove beside it shone brighter, as though defying the past to reclaim its sky. After the ceremony, Lucas lingered by the display long after the visitors had gone. Outside, the winter sun dipped low, throwing the city into a soft gold haze. He imagined her as she had been, walking along the Rhine in her long coat, hands tucked against the wind, face tilted toward a future she would never see. She had outlived empires and ideologies, but what endured was something quieter, the ordinary kindness of one woman's decision not to look away from the wounded world. Later that evening, as the museum emptied, a custodian sweeping the floors noticed Lucas still standing before the case. "You knew her?" the man asked in a thick local accent. Lucas nodded. "She was my family's conscience." The custodian smiled. "Then you're lucky. Most families lose theirs in war." When he finally left, the streets of Berlin were slick with rain, neon lights reflecting in puddles where rubble had once been. The air smelled faintly of bread from a nearby bakery, an echo of the ovens Frau Koenig had tended half a century earlier. Lucas walked slowly toward the river, the folded letter still in his pocket. On a bridge overlooking the water, he stopped. Below, the current glowed with city lights. He thought of all the rivers that had carried history's ashes, the Vistula, the Elbe, the Danube, and now this one. Calm at last. He opened the letter again and read one more line she had written. "Redemption does not erase the past. It rewrites the ending." He folded the page, kissed it lightly, and tucked it back inside his coat. Far away in Geneva, the archivists of the International Red Cross prepared for a digital preservation project. Among the boxes retrieved from storage was a small envelope marked "Donor Unknown, 1947. Inside lay another copy of the rusted Iron Cross and a handwritten note in German. "Artifact from a war where obedience was mistaken for honor." The archivist held it up to the light, tracing the faint signature below, E. Schmidt. She smiled softly, unaware that the same woman's name now adorned hospitals across Germany. "Still teaching," she murmured before cataloging it under Recovered Humanity. That same year, a group of nursing students visited Berlin from Warsaw. Their guide paused before the Mercy After War display, explaining that it represented one woman's transformation from soldier to healer. A young Polish student named Anna raised her hand. Was she punished for her service in the Reich? The guide hesitated. She was humiliated first, he said, then forgiven by time. Anna leaned closer to the glass, studying the dove-shaped locket. "It looks like hope," she whispered. The moment was captured in a photograph, her reflection overlapping the locket's sheen. Years later, that image would be used in textbooks about post-war reconciliation, captioned, "The Generation That Inherited Mercy." Time moved on, but stories, like rivers, have a way of finding new mouths to speak through. In 2005, when the last veterans' parades gave way to silent vigils, Lucas returned to his home near the Rhine and began sorting through boxes of his grandfather's photographs. In one, Erica knelt beside a group of children, her sleeves rolled up, eyes bright with tired joy. On the back, Martin had written, "She feeds them as if she's feeding herself." Lucas placed the photograph on his desk and began writing the story that had haunted 3 generations. A story not of defeat or victory, but of transformation. He titled it, "The Weight of a Medal." The manuscript blended history with memory, witness with imagination. When it was published, critics called it the most human account of post-war Germany in decades. In classrooms, teachers read aloud the passage where the women's medals fell into the wooden box under the rain. Students listened, wide-eyed, as if hearing thunder from a forgotten storm. Some wept, others simply sat in silence. The silence was enough. At the book's launch in Frankfurt, Lucas was asked if the story was truly real. He smiled. "As real as any confession," he said. "Facts fade. Courage doesn't." A journalist pressed further. "Do you think she would forgive those who still glorify the past?" Lucas shook his head. "Forgiveness isn't agreement," he said. "It's refusing to become what hurt you." A decade later, the museum in Berlin commissioned a new film for its digital archive, a short documentary using restored wartime footage and voice recordings from nurses and civilians. The narrator's voice, soft, deliberate, spoke over grainy images of rain, rubble, and faces. They stood in the courtyard, medals in their hands, rain in their hair. They thought they were losing honor, but they were gaining humanity. Every clink of metal was a heartbeat restarting. As the screen faded to black, the final frame showed the locket and the Iron Cross side by side. The caption reading, "Transformation is louder than history." In theaters across Europe, Audiences sat in silence through the credits, unwilling to break the spell. For many, it was the first time they had seen the war not as a contest of nations, but as a confession of hearts. In her hometown, the clinic Erica once directed still stood, a modest building with white shutters and a courtyard filled with roses. The plaque by the gate read, Schmidt House, founded 1952, for the care of the lost. The staff, most of them young, barely knew her story beyond fragments. Yet every morning they passed beneath her photograph in the entrance hall, a black and white portrait showing a calm woman with eyes that seemed to know every sorrow yet still believed in healing. Someone had placed a small inscription beneath it. Mercy is the only uniform that never stains. Every year on the anniversary of her death, former patients and their families brought flowers to the steps. A local choir sang softly, their voices mingling with the wind. In that ritual, her memory lived, not in medals or monuments, but in gestures repeated by those she had taught. By the 2020s, the last living witnesses of that generation were nearly gone. Yet their stories found new breath through archives, documentaries, and digital restorations. AI-enhanced footage brought faces to life again. The trembling hands surrendering medals, the rain-slicked cobblestones, the eyes of women realizing that the war inside them had finally ended. Online, young viewers left comments beneath the film. I didn't know compassion could look like this. She reminds me that heroism isn't loud. History had become hologram and data. But in that transformation, the emotion endured, still raw, still real. It was as if the world, in finally being able to see clearly, understood what those women had lived through when they chose to be seen without pride. One quiet morning in 2030, museum curators opened the Mercy After War exhibit for maintenance. The locket had tarnished slightly with age. The iron cross sealed in nitrogen had begun to flake. As they polished the glass, a shaft of sunlight slipped through the high windows, striking both objects at once. For a moment, the room filled with reflected light, one beam from iron, one from silver, melding into a single brief shimmer that painted the walls gold. The custodian looked up and whispered, "It's as if they forgave each other." The curator smiled. Or perhaps they were never enemies, only lessons. That night, Lucas, now old, his eyesight dimming, received a letter from the museum's director. It invited him to contribute to a new exhibition titled Women Who Rebuilt the World. He declined. Instead, he sent a small parcel containing one final artifact, his godmother's stethoscope, still wrapped in the linen she had used during her relief missions. Alongside it, a note, "Use this not to listen for guilt, but for heartbeat. If you can still hear it." Humanity isn't lost. The stethoscope was placed beside the locket and the iron cross. Visitors who leaned close could almost imagine hearing the faint echo of a pulse, the rhythm of history forgiving itself. Decades later, when the museum was rebuilt yet again, its architecture of glass and light designed to reflect transparency, an inscription was carved at the entrance in 20 languages. It read, "They stood in the rain, humiliated, and found their souls. Let no one ever call mercy weakness again." In the final shot of the documentary adaptation, the camera moves through that same museum at closing time. The lights dim one by one. The lens lingers on the case containing the iron cross, the locket, and the stethoscope. The narrator's voice returns, almost a whisper. When the medals fell, the sound was not of defeat. It was the sound of a world beginning again. Outside, rain begins to fall, soft, relentless, familiar. The camera tilts upward, capturing the raindrops streaking down the glass walls, merging the reflections of the past and the present into one shimmering surface. And for a moment, as the music fades, the viewer cannot tell whether the rain is outside or inside, whether it is washing away memory or keeping it alive. Fade to black.